nothing more perfect than a hot cup of coffee on a beautiful fall day. Hello everybody, it is October 1st. We have made it to fall. It's officially here, and with that, we also have a wrap up for the month of September. I read a lot of books in the month of September, and this isn't even all of it. I'm really trying to focus on reading books from my physical TBR. It's right behind me. It's all of the books that I own that I have not read yet. I did a pretty good job to start off with. These are all of the books that I read. I read a few romances. We have thrillers in here, historical fictions. We have 3 5-stars, one of which was a 4-star, but I bumped it up because I keep thinking about it to this day, and I can't wait to tell you what it is. I did listen to a few audiobooks that I will talk about as well, and I DNF'd quite a bit. I DNF'd more than I normally would have. Grab your coffee, grab your beverage, and let's talk about all of the books that I read in September. For this wrap up, we're gonna go in order of 5 stars to least favorite books. The first book is You Again by Kate Goldbeck. This is a book that I had originally given a 4 stars. Since I read it at the beginning of September, I cannot stop thinking about this book. Ari is our main female character. She lives in a life of avoidance attachment style. She hooks up with a lot of people day and night. And then we have our main male character. His name is Josh. He is a hopeless romantic. They instantly dislike each other when they find out that they've been hooking up with the same person. Right off the bat, we have enemies to we don't know yet. What I like about this story is that it hops forward in time throughout the years as Ari and Josh bump into each other at different points in their lives. When they eventually meet up at one point, they are both heartbroken for their own reasons, and they decide to essentially be friends with benefits. What could go wrong with that? Their banter is perfect. I also love the slow burn of this story. One of my favorite tropes is enemies to friends to lovers, and this is the perfect book for that. We're supposed to find flaws with each of these characters as they go through their ebbs and flows of their romantic life. They are not perfect by any means, and that's what makes this book so raw and emotional. One thing that I have to say that I don't like about this story is the third act conflict. I didn't care for it. I think that once you do find a good ending, it should be that way. Especially with romance stories, you don't always have to have a third act conflict, and I thought it was pretty unnecessary in this story. If you read it, let me know if you think the same way. This is a very emotional rom-com, and it sounds counterintuitive, but I think that's what makes it so special. These characters feel real emotions of heartbreak, and they're both suffering together, so the emotions are just heightened up in that sense, and I really liked it because we have 2 flawed characters that slowly grow and get better together, and there's something so sweet about that. This is the perfect fall book. If you haven't picked it up yet, I highly recommend. Loved the story. 5-star, loved. Long Bright River by Liz Moore is another book that I gave a 5 stars. I'm not going to go into too much detail since I do have a fall vlog where I go in depth about this book, but I love this story. If you read God of the Woods and you liked it, then this should be your next pick. This book is really emotional and such a difficult story to read because it takes place in Kensington, Philadelphia during the opioid crisis. We follow our main character. Her name is Mickey. She's a cop who basically patrols the streets of Kensington, Philadelphia. There is a homicide that happens that she runs into, and she's trying to solve this homicide as a cop, not a detective. But the catch is that her sister lives on the streets because she is a drug addict. So now Mickey has to try to find her sister before her sister gets killed. This book is about family and sisterhood. It's about forgiving for the wrongs that have been done in the past. This is a very dark and emotional story, and one that everyone should read if you check your trigger warnings and you are okay with them. There is neglect, there's abuse, there is pregnancy loss and drug use. Obviously, I did mention that. There is murder and death. It's just a really tough book, and Liz Moore packs a lot of punch into this beautifully written story. I think that the ending is somber as well, which you'll have to just watch my vlog. That's it. Growing up, we've been taught of these mythological stories of Greek gods and men alike, from Hercules to Icarus to Agamemnon, Achilles, and even Zeus. And women are normally the subplot in these stories, but not this one. Clytemnestra is a story about complicated families, civil wars, motherly love, and a queen in the making. I loved this book so much, to the point where I annotated the heck out of it. You can't see it, but you just must believe it. Clytemnestra is a story about a princess of Sparta who has a sense of freedom. She is trained like a warrior. She is treated like man alone. However, this all ends when she is forced to get married off. She ends up becoming a queen with little power and a lot of hunger for revenge. This is a story about a woman who has been wronged her entire life, and now she has to fight the injustices of patriarchy and sexism and abuse, betrayal, and societal expectations. This is a story about a woman on the hunt to just find some peace with herself. I highly recommend. If it's a 5 out of 5, then I recommend. And this is a 5 out of 5. There are 2 quotes in here that I want to share. There is nothing more powerful than a strong-willed woman. There will come a time when songs are sung about her, about the people she loved and the ones she hated, of Clytemnestra, cruel queen and unfaithful wife. But it doesn't matter. She was there. She knows songs never tell the truth. And that is how the book ends, with that line. Enough said. Starling House by Alix E. Harrow. This was a pleasant surprise. I gave this book a 4 out of 5. This takes place in Eden, Kentucky. Our main character, Opal, she is just trying to make ends meet. Her parents both died, and she has to take care of her younger brother. Opal ends up meeting Arthur Starling, who is the warden of the Starling House, a haunted house in Eden, Kentucky. She has always been called towards this house and keeps having dreams about this house, but she doesn't really know why. She ends up becoming a maid for Arthur to clean up the house, just so she can learn a little bit more about this house that is haunting her dreams. I really like Opal, and I think that she's a really fleshed out character. She has flaws that we dive into. She comes with a lot of baggage, which makes sense because her parents both died. She is in her early 20s taking care of her teenage brother. She just does not have the best life. I really like Arthur as a character. We get a little bit of his point of view as we read from the story. He is just a very misunderstood guy. He is grumpy but treats Opal really well, and this is not a romance story by any means, but the relationships that they build is really comforting, especially when Opal doesn't really have anybody in her life besides her brother. I would characterize this as a cozy horror fantasy. It's definitely a horror slash fantasy, gothic fantasy if you must. I am throwing a lot of words out there. Let's say gothic fantasy, but it's also a little bit cozy as we read it. It's perfect for fall. I really enjoyed the magical aspects of it. I went into the story knowing nothing about this. I bought this book a year ago and finally picked it up, and I have to say that it was really good. I should have picked it up sooner. The atmosphere of fall and getting ready for spooky season was a really good mindset to have while reading this book. I definitely recommend. I enjoyed it. I really like Alix E. Harrow's writing style. She is very descriptive and uses a lot of similes and metaphors to help us understand the whole atmosphere of the story. It was good. I don't know where my Kindle is, so I'm going to put the book right here. The Serpent and the Wolf by Rebecca Robinson. This was kindly gifted to me by Saga Press, and I am so glad that I read this romantasy. It was a breath of fresh air. I'm trying to read more fantasy, and I mentioned this in a few previous vlogs. This is a high-stakes political war story about our main character named Vasa, and Vasa is forced to marry Reed of Mira so that her brother can start an intercontinental war. Crazy. We start the story off very fast. It starts off strong, and I really like how the plot went on. I also really like our main characters. Vasa comes with a lot of baggage and emotions. Her parents both died, and her brother hates her, so she doesn't really have anybody other than Reed now, who she's forced to marry. Reed is also a very sweet and likable character. He reminds me a lot of Rhysand from ACOTAR. He just wants to take care of Vasa, and I think that's really sweet. If you're a fan of slow burn, and I mean sloth burning romance, this is for you. There isn't really any romance up until like 67%, and it's more of a plot driven war story, as I mentioned. There's also a magic system in here, which is very fun. It's witchy, and I did not see it coming. I went into the story blind. I didn't think I was even going to like it because it's a political war story, but loved it a lot. The magic system is so important because Vasa has magic, and she has these powers that she knows nothing about. She's actually trying to get rid of these powers, but she ends up learning to hone her abilities and using them for the good. In this book, we get arranged marriage and fake dating, so fake marriage where they have to force to like each other. We also get this rivalry between siblings. It's a really good time. There is action in this book too, and I overall liked it a lot. My one issue with this story is that there wasn't a world map, and that might be because I got the ebook version when I was reading it, so maybe the physical copy will have a map. I also think that as a fantasy and as a new world, the world wasn't fleshed out enough for me to really be immersed into the world, especially since there is no map. It was still a really good read. The ending threw me for a loop, and I cannot believe that now I have to wait for the sequel to come out when this book hasn't even come out yet. This book does come out November 19th. I hope you read it so we can talk about it. Director's Cut by Carlyn Greenwald. I was gifted this book by Vintage Books. I gave this a 3 out of 5. This is a sapphic romance where Hollywood meets an academic setting. Val is an A-list actor whose directorial debut isn't doing really well, so she decides to pursue her passion that she's been putting off, which is teaching. She ends up being a guest teacher for the semester at USC with Maeve. The story starts off with a little bit of miscommunication between Maeve and Val, and I'm not really a fan of miscommunication, but you just had to keep reading and go with the roller coaster of emotions. Val and Maeve finally hit it off, and they're starting to like each other. Val has a really good life. She is enjoying where things are at right now until she finds out that her directorial debut is doing really well and got accepted to a film festival. Now she has to decide if she's going to leave teaching early for the festival or leave her festival behind. This is your classic rom-com, but I really enjoyed the film and academic commentary that's put into this story. Carlyn Greenwald has worked in Hollywood as well, so it's nice to see that she has this experience and background to put into this story. I also really enjoyed the conversations around the LGBTQA plus community and how that affects the film industry and how she praises therapy. Some triggers to look out for include abusive relationships, mental health, disordered eating. Carlyn does a really good job of bringing these difficult topics into real life conversations, and making the characters feel more relatable. It was a really fun book and I liked it. If you want a different rom-com, this is one to try. What the River Knows by Isabel Ibañez. Unfortunately, I did not like this story. I gave this a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I've had this book since October of last year, so it's been a year. And I think that's why I didn't care for it as much. At the time when I bought it, I was so excited to read this book. I had heard such good things, and I think the anticipation and the excitement just wore off, and I sort of felt forced to read this book. That is my fault. There are also other reasons as to why I didn't care for this book. This book is about a girl named Ibañez, and her parents end up dying, and the last thing that her parents give her is a ring that is magical. This ring ends up taking her to Egypt because that's where her parents died, and she wants to learn more about what they did for a living because they never invited her to come along. She ends up going to Cairo to meet up with her uncle, and then this guy named Wit who helps her uncle out, and this is a true enemies to lovers story. But it's not just about romance. I wanted to like the story because I grew up watching The Mummy and The Mummy Returns way too many times. The third one is not very good, by the way. However, I didn't like our main characters at all. I thought that Inez was annoying and Wit was very self-centered. Unfortunately, the first half of the story was pretty boring to me, and then the second half, you finally start to learn more about her parents. I did enjoy learning about the history of Egypt. That was fun in a magical, realistic way. I know that the sequel is coming out end of this year, and I don't know, with how the book ended, now I am wondering if I should give the sequel a try. It was just not a book for me, but I do recommend this story because a lot of people love it. I just didn't. The Girls in the Garden by Lisa Jewell. This was my least favorite Lisa Jewell book that I have read. I give this a 2 out of 5 stars. I was also looking at the ratings for all of her books, and I learned that this is her least favorite book by people who have read her books. So it doesn't make me feel as bad. The cover is beautiful, but the story fell flat for me. Our main character, Claire, and her daughters move into a row of houses that share a garden in this really fancy neighborhood in London. During a neighborhood party, one of Claire's daughters is found unconscious with blood all over her face, and she does not know what happened, and neither does anybody else. I found this story to be slow and pretty anticlimactic. The story follows the different tenants in the neighborhood as they're trying to put the puzzle pieces together because they were all at this neighborhood garden party, but nobody saw anything. It wasn't until the last third of the story where pieces start coming together, and I think that's a lot of reading for nothing, in my opinion. This story is about community secrets and the complexities of adolescence. We do have quite a few children in this story as Claire is trying to figure out what happened. I just didn't like reading about it. It was pretty meh. I remember the beginning of the book and then the end of the book, and I wouldn't recommend this book. Now we're gonna get into the audiobooks that I read for the month. Starting with Bright Young Women by Jesicca Knoll. This is a true crime novel that centers around the Ted Bundy murders, but you're never actually told it's about him. It is told from a woman's perspective, which is one of the reasons why I was so interested to read this story. I started reading the physical book and didn't really feel very attached to it, so I shifted over to the audiobook, and I'm so glad that I did. This is a twisty story that we already know about, but Jesicca Knoll does such a good job of flipping the narrative and talking through the woman's perspective, and these women are the victims of the murderer, Ted Bundy. This is a story that alternates between two timelines where two women are coming together to figure out who the murderer actually is based on the attacks. What made me really pause and think more about this story is that normally male serial killers and male sociopaths and murderers are glamorized in a way. This just spins everything on its head and makes us realize that it's actually disturbing and disgusting. And it reminds us how the focus should not be on the serial killers, it should be on the victims. It is about time that we hear the stories that actually matter. What I struggled with the story is the shifting of timelines between these characters. I thought that the pacing was a little bit slow, but I understand that it's needed for the full picture. I do feel a little bit weird that I'm reading something that happened in real life, even though this is kind of a fictional story, but it's not, because it's based off of true events. Even though we know of Ted Bundy's story, this book is emotional, it's disturbing and refreshing in a way because of how this is read. I love the name of the book, Bright Young Woman, because it's said to be a jab at Ted Bundy because he was told that he was a bright young man. Suck it, Ted. Girls get it done. In September, I finally finished Wildfire, which is the second book in the Maple Hills trilogy by Hannah Grace. This was an audiobook that I'd probably been reading for 2 months. I truly do remember what I read, but I don't really have the words to explain what I read, which is why I don't really think I should be reviewing it. But what I'm trying to say is that this was a book that I just wanted to have in the background, and I finished it, and I enjoyed it. Oof. Now I'm going to talk about the books that I DNF'd. A book that I started after Wildfire is Daydream by Hannah Grace. It's her most recent release, and it is about Henry from the very first and second book, and he was actually my favorite character in these books, but I DNF'd this book. I feel bad, but I have been forcing myself to listen to it, and that is never a good thing. You shouldn't force yourself to read a book, and that was a sign for me to just DNF it. I have other books that I'd rather reread. I'm about 54% of the way through. I was, because I'm not going to continue reading, because I DNF'd it. I think the reason why I struggled to pick it up and keep listening to it is that I had already read 2 of the books from that series, and it's a romance, so I know how it's going to end. I just don't feel like I need to finish it. I am not in the mood for a romance right now, so that is why I am not going to continue with the book. Overall, with the series, I don't think that it's anything amazing. I think it's a fun series to read. If you want a romance book, then they're great. It's a sports romance. The first one is, the second one not so much, and then this third one, I don't think it is as much either from what I had read. I'm just ready to be done with the Maple Hill series, so I'm just gonna stop there. The last book that I DNF'd was a book that I was so excited for. Oh my goodness, it is Flirting with Disaster by Naina Kumar. I read Say You'll Be Mine earlier this year, and I really loved it. I loved it a lot. I read it during a 24-hour readathon. Why I really liked Say You'll Be Mine is because Naina Kumar did a really good job of talking about South Asian culture in a approachable way. I did not see that with Flirting with Disaster. Now, there is nothing wrong about writing stories and thinking outside of the box, but the reason why I like Naina Kumar so much as an author is because of the South Asian representation that she brings into her characters. I unfortunately did not see that with our 2 main characters at all. I got 70% of the way through, really just didn't feel like I could relate with the characters and the story. This is about Nikhil and I forget what our female character's name is. This is what happens when you DNF it. What is this book even about? Apparently there's a movie called Flirting with Disaster. Oh, Meena. Her name is Meena. This is a story about Meena and Nikhil, and they decide to get married pretty quickly, and then they've been together for 3 years, but then it's been 6 years where they've been apart, and she's finally coming back home to Texas to finalize divorce papers. This is a forced proximity, a one bed trope, but it's been years since they've seen each other, and so there's this tension and buildup. He still is in love with her. She is trying to move on because she's dating another guy. See, my issue here is that I feel like Naina was putting in all of these tropes that she could possibly put into the story, and it didn't really feel like things connected together. I didn't like it. As a South Asian myself, it's good to support other South Asians, and I'm still going to recommend this book because we need to be reading more books by BIPOC individuals and authors. And also, reading is subjective. Just because I don't like a book doesn't mean that you're not going to like it either. So even though that I DNF'd it, I am going to recommend it. And I say this especially because I loved Say You'll Be Mine, and maybe that means you don't pick up Flirting with Disaster when it comes out in January 2025. Maybe that means you pick up Say You'll Be Mine, which would be great. If you do end up reading Say You'll Be Mine, or if you do get the arc for Flirting with Disaster, as I did, then let me know what you think after you read it, because I would love to have a conversation about it. I don't know what else to say other than I'm really sad that I didn't like Flirting with Disaster, but sometimes that's just the way things go. Alright friends, those are all of the physical books that I read, and the audiobooks that I listened to, and the books that I DNF'd. September was a really good month overall. Even though there were some books that weren't my cup of tea, I still left with 3 5-stars, and I would say that is a win. Let me know in the comments down below what your favorite book that you read in September was. I would love to hear. I will see you in another video next week. Bye!